Welcome back, lady lads and gentle lads, to another episode of the Smastian Says podcast. In this episode, we're going to be going over, as we have been for the first two, more news about the MechWarrior 5 AMAs. And the subject of today's AMA, or yesterday's AMA as of the recording of this, is essentially focused on career progression in various ways. And I'll be going over a lot of the main points in far more compacted detail than we have been going over in the past, because unfortunately, Kibbs will not be joining us for this episode of the podcast. And so I'll just be waffling on my own about the various things that have been stated so far. A side benefit of this is that I get to now split this up into specific sections. Chiefly one pertaining to campaign progression as a whole, a slight note on the map maker, and then various points about game mechanics, which are then going to be subdivided into a discussion about reputation and how it affects campaign progression. What can we expect from the mission types that we might see in the game? Some more points about starting location and how that affects campaign progression. Salvage, how will that mechanic work? We have some more news about that. The co-op mode, when we get to the co-op mode, you'll understand. Notes about the Inner Sphere map and how it will change over time. A couple points about BattleMechs. And then some miscellaneous points about the dropship, Solaris, and various other things. So without further ado, let's get into the first of the sections, campaign progression. So as stated before, the main story will be sort of a revenge-type narrative, where the main focus isn't so much to get you to be a big part of the grander scale conflicts that are changing the borders of the Inner Sphere throughout the time period in which you'll be playing, which will last from somewhere like the interwar period between Succession War 3 and 4, all the way up until the year 3050, or somewhere thereabouts, close to the year 3050. Sometime before the clan invasion, for sure. Anyway, since it is going to be this smaller scale, more focused narrative that's supposed to somehow focus on your character, but you're going to be a silent protagonist. But anyway, this is the story we're rolling with. It isn't going to have this grand scale effect, and as a result, the events that happen to you are going to be those that happen to a typical mercenary unit. Think of yourself like a construction worker, essentially, in a big city. There's many things going on in the big city, but will you be a part of the bigger things, yes or no? Not necessarily. But you are going to be building the houses. Anyway, that poor analogy aside, let's move on a bit. Questions were asked about the possibility of sequence breaking the game, and the devs have spoken positively of it in some respect. First and foremost, they are trying to create a certain sense of progression from starting off with, like, this sort of rags to riches progression you tend to get in the Battletech games, where you start out with lighter mechs and eventually move on to your big fuck-off assault mechs, as some people have said in the past. So one of the main worries, of course, is will you be able to still participate in, or be able to punch above your weight, and potentially get your hands on some really juicy tech very early on in the campaign. And given what they're trying to tweak with the reputation system, there is going to be a fairly wide spread of what are they called? Oh yeah, varying difficulties of mission. So, taking the Harebrained Schemes BattleTech experience as an example, you'll have something from you'll have missions from 1 star to 5 star, or 1 skull missions to 5 skull missions, I think they were. Anyway, your range of m- available missions based on your reputation and assets is going to be fairly wide, they say. So you will have opportunities to say, with a light or medium lance, run up against maybe one assault mech that's being escorted by a medium mech and 2 lights. Who knows? Um, Specifics weren't mentioned, but it might be possible to sequence break the game in that way. So, and to balance this, you will be, of course, facing, excuse me, the higher maintenance costs that are typically associated with assault mechs. So, if you, with your light mech lance of 4 light mechs, somehow manage to get your paws on an Atlas, sure, cool. You can field it, you can repair it, you can equip it the way you want to within the bounds of the equipment system. And yeah, you'll be able to take it into battles, but you won't necessarily be running into missions that'll give you enough money in order to sustain that thing in peak condition, for example. Either that or it'll be at massive detriment to the repairs you undertake on other mechs. So there will be that sort of trade-off. Um, and yeah. Moving on from that, they haven't said anything more concrete about the length of the campaign, unfortunately. Um, So yeah, in terms of hours played, what are we likely to look at? I'd say ballpark the industry standard, which is somewhere between 30 to 40 hours worth for a campaign, typically. Like that's what was advertised on the box of Oblivion back in the day for the Xbox 360. It's what was advertised for games like um, The Witcher 3 to some extent. I mean, you can breeze through it in 50 hours, but honestly, you don't want to. So yeah, just assume industry standard. It's a pretty safe bet, I think. Either way. Um, Furthermore, you can totally ignore the campaign if you want to and just do side mission content the entire time for roleplay purposes or because you've already done the campaign. There will be nothing stopping you from starting a new game and just waffling around the galaxy. You won't be punished for it. It'll all be good. On that note, then, there will not be any hidden endings. So when the campaign ends, it ends. You will instead be able to still roam around the galaxy. The cutoff date will be frozen, however, no new events will be happening, but you'll be able to continue playing on beyond the cutoff date. That said, yeah, since there aren't going to be any new events, your typical fare of post-game missions are going to be just the typical procedurally generated stuff you will tend to run into anyway. Um, as a further note on that, there will not be any New Game Plus features. Every time you start a new game, it's going to be with a different faction, for example. In fact, that is really the only change you will get. Some slight variation between starting parameters. So if you start out in Davian space, um, you will get access to a specific mech, a specific reputation buff with the Davians, and a debuff with, say, the Steiners or something, I don't know. And maybe some more C-bills than you would get for, say, signing on with House Karita. Like, just those tiny variations in the starting setup. There is more to say about that, but I will go over it in the um, specific section dedicated to it. Um, So yeah, in case anyone's wondering, yes, the Helm memory core will be recovered within the span of the game, and the map will change to reflect that. You will start seeing more lost tech show up in item shops. You will see more of it being used on the field as the game progresses, after, of course, the discovery of the Helm memory core, and so on and so forth. If anyone from the lore community is wondering what's up with Comstar, no comment is the official stance that the devs have taken. So, will Comstar be a thing? Probably. Will you be able to visit Terra and pull some shenanigans there? Who knows? No comment. And as a final note on campaign missions, there will not be a possibility to replay them for prestige after you've already completed them. There are some systems being discussed potentially for the instant action mode, where you might be able to do challenge runs of those missions for yourself if you want to, in the instant action queue, but they're still trying to flesh that out, so no official statement on that yet. And there is one more point about campaign missions I wanted to say. Oh yes, if you fail a campaign mission, you will be able to retry later on that same mission. So failing a mission does not end your campaign in any way. You will just be forced to retake the mission. Without save scumming, I think it was implied. But if you want to save scum, which I know a lot of people will, you totally can do that. And while we're on that note, might as well mention the miscellaneous bit, because I find it funny. Someone asked a question about it wasn't exactly will it be possible to save scum. They were just asking if there's going to be a save game system, or if this is going to be functioning along an Iron Man mode. And essentially, the dev's stance on it was that, yeah, you can totally save scum your way through the game if you wanted to. I'm paraphrasing, mind you. This isn't what they said exactly, but it was on everyone's mind. So yeah. Moving on to game mechanics then, and this is where the real meat of the discussion is going to be taking place. Let's cover reputation now. Reputation is what you expect it to be. Your relations will go up with the factions that you fight for, and they'll go down with the factions that you fight against. The higher your reputation with a faction will be, the better the missions that you will get, and the better the payouts will be. The typical stuff. Essentially what you got in the Harebrained Schemes Battletech experience. Albeit with some more nuance. For example, if your reputation with a faction is too low, of course you'll get worse missions and payouts, but there might also be a chance that they can stiff you up on a payout or betray you outright. Nothing was said in concrete terms about it, but they were hinting that this is a possibility, depending on, well, how poor your standing with them is. That said, unlike with Harebrained Schemes Battletech, as you now have it with the Flashpoint update, there is not going to be a loyalty system, so there is not going to be a possibility to ally, say, with House Steiner, which will put you permanently at odds with other factions. You will always be a mercenary, and you will always have access to some low-level jobs, even from the people that hate you the most. This is partially done in order to prevent you from getting into a state in the game where you can no longer dig your way out of a hole you've dug for yourself. And it's also partially just to give you the opportunity to get back into a faction's good graces. Say, if you do want to, say, depending on what happens in the inner sphere event-wise, maybe you want to ally with House Karita instead of House Steiner. Your mileage may vary with this, of course, but the option is there so that you don't dig a hole too deep for yourself. Another reason why this system is put in place, I suspect, is because galactic events will have an effect on your faction reputation, based on what your starting faction was. So if you were House Liao and they went to war with House Merrick, then the Merrick hegemony, or no, not hegemony, is it? The Free Worlds League, that's the one. The Free Worlds League will, by default, be more at odds with you because you are a member of House Liao, essentially. And so yeah, I suspect that this is another reason why they want to put in the system to prevent you from being permanently locked out of missions from factions. And so yeah, while the next point of discussion is missions. We've already discussed main campaign missions a bit. I'm quickly going over the script I have for myself. Yeah, okay. Main campaign missions will be handcrafted, as well as some side content. So, you won't be running into any procedurally generated story missions, and not all side missions will be procedurally generated, completely anyway. That said, assets are going to be recycled fairly heavily in the procedural mission generator because, well, they're working off of the same tile sets. Sure, some maps in the story mode will be more custom tailored in order to provide a more, well, a grander narrative experience, of course. But when it comes down to recycling those assets for procedural missions, yeah, this will likely happen. There are tile sets, we've discussed this before. This also includes randomized opposing forces, and these will be mixed and matched according to the specifications of the generator. Right. On the note of failing missions will result in lower payouts or no payout whatsoever, maybe a slight relationship debuff. As I said before, you shouldn't be able to spiral yourself into a point where you can't dig yourself out. And yes, mission difficulty. Mission difficulty won't only be tied to reputation, but also to the assets you have at your disposal. So, of course, no one is going to offer you 5-star missions if all you have is light mechs. And if you want to punch above your weight and you have low enough a reputation, then of course they won't offer it to you. But if you're also just too light on tonnage, they aren't going to be sending you up against 2 full assault lances either. So, you'll be fed easier missions, and as your rep grows and as your assets grow, the difficulty of missions will increase. But if you also just get a really bad luck streak with missions and you lose too many units and you're on the brink of bankruptcy, the factions are going to start throwing easier missions your way because, well, they know that you can't take on those more difficult missions anyway because you lack the assets. So there are these safety measures in place. And granted, to what degree they're going to be taken advantage of is another story entirely, especially given the fact that you can reload saves. So, who knows? Personally, I would urge to save scum as little as possible, because it does detract from the gameplay experience, I find. But at the same time, I totally get that there are some frustrating parts where you just want to advance just to see the rest of the story, and, well, you might want to re-roll the RNG dice, depending on, well, RNG. How much RNG will there be, really? Who knows? Well, you get what I'm saying. People have asked in the AMA about, like, what kind of flavor text you'll get to immerse yourself in a mission, and it'll be just your typical, here are your objectives, these are the consequences for failure, these are the consequences for victory. Just like a text blurb, possibly. Maybe there will be some voice lines for it. Who knows? But it's not going to be anything too majestic outside of story missions, presumably. But one hopes that it also won't be Darius levels of just, oh, look at this, we weren't expecting reinforcements. Now there's reinforcements. Well, I don't know about you, Darius, but I was always expecting those reinforcements because your intelligence is poor, always. Anyway. Moving on then. Gonna take a quick sip. There will be what are known as arc missions in the course of the game. So these are going to be like your flashpoints, like these multiple deployment missions where you drop in and, well, you do a rapid succession of missions that must be completed in a certain combat zone. Caveats to this are going to be that you will have time to repair in between missions. It just won't be enough time to fully repair, for example, unless things go exceptionally well for you. On the note of story, you will be able to choose branching mission paths in these story arc missions. There's no explicit mechanic that'll let you go perfectly rogue to steal things for yourself, but there are some buzzings that perhaps the devs are working in order to include such a system. But it was nothing confirmed. It was just like willful, or willful is the wrong word, but sort of wily musing on the subject of going fully rogue. Either way, story arc missions will have branching mission paths. You will choose a side or another, like, say, a loyalist or rebel faction, and you'll be able to fight down that tree branch or the other one. But later on down the story arc, potentially you'll be given the opportunity to switch sides. And correspondingly, your mission rewards will either increase or decrease based on that. One wonders how many of these story arc missions there will be. These sound as if they will be more handcrafted than your typical side content fare. Because the story arc missions will be side content. They will be outside of the main campaign. I feel I should mention that just in case there was any uncertainty about it. And yeah, you'll be given alternate missions based on which side you choose. And some story arc missions, if you fail them, you might be given alternate missions as a result of that failure. So there's a lot of play to be had here. One wonders exactly how far they'll push this system, how much time they'll spend developing it. But it's something I'll remain optimistic about for now. Right. Feeling a bit thirsty. Anyway, it's just really heated up a lot here. Like, it was frigid cold yesterday, and now we're like seeing 20 degrees here. Sorry for the mild tangent, but I do want to check this. How warm is it in my location? Yeah, it's like 16 degrees. It's 16 bloody degrees. Come on. Global warming. Fun stuff. Anywho, getting back on topic. Some people ask the question of whether or not you'll be able to, as a 5-star merc outfit, be able to take on 1-star missions later on in the campaign if you should so choose, just to like curb stomp the weaker opponents. The devs have said, yeah, this possibility will be open to you if you can find it. You'll be, of course, given lesser rewards for it, monetarily, and you won't be able to get any reputation gain off of it because, like, what kind of renown is there in fielding 4 Annihilators against a full lance of Locusts? Come on. But should you want to, the opportunity is there. And while we're on the subject of the late game, there is that ever-present worry that the late game will force you into a position where the only optimal way to play it is with 4 assault mechs, and because the things you'll be running into are just so heavily tunned, there are just going to be so many enemies that the only way to get through those missions is with these heavier mechs. Because they can field the bigger guns, and because they will be able to field more armor, as they'll have more spare tonnage for it. Well, this may become the case from the sounds of things, due to the way that reputation gain works and the way that mission difficulty scales with the assets you have at your disposal anyway. A lot of the later game missions will likely be the sort where the only optimal solution is to take the 4 assaults. That said, there might be some timed missions or recovery missions as you get in Battletech, where it might suit you better to field a light mech or two instead of the full squad of 4 assaults. Your mileage may vary with this, and this is a system I'm not too optimistic about personally. We'll have to see, really. I'm, of course, basing my judgment a lot based off what I saw with Harebrained Schemes Battletech, and after having played it for near on 400 hours. Like, a lot of the recovery missions start getting stale. Like, there is no real way to play that game other than to just continually ramp up the tonnage of your lance. You can go back to the lower level missions, but by that point, I mean, your maintenance costs are so high that it's like, why? Unless you're just trying to clear out all the missions within a system. At which point, yeah, sure, things will go differently then. If you'll still have a 3 skull recovery mission available to you, sure, fine. You'll be able to field your full lance of assaults on that 5 skull mission, and then on the 3 skull mission you can just drop into with a Pirate's Bane or a Locust of other variant, and run for the objective, pick it up, evacuate. But if you'll be able to go toe-to-toe with assault mechs with a full squad of lights, if you're good enough, sure, go for it. If you and your co-op buddies want to do such things, absolutely, by all means. But overall, I don't think it's going to turn out that well. For most people, certainly. And well, enough waffling on about that. The question has again come up whether or not we'll be able to fight with allied units. The devs have said yes, of course. There will be some missions where you'll be running into 2 full lances of enemy mechs on your own, for example. It depends on the mission. Or it would depend on the mission. But there will be some cases where you'll be given, like, a lance of vehicles, for example, to assist you in fighting off 3 lances of mechs of various tonnage, or you might be even thrown into a skirmish scenario where an ongoing battle between 3 lances is already afoot, and you'll be like the third wheel, dropping another 4 mechs into the fray. The devs have expressed desire to expand the system so that they can eventually do like these bigger set piece battles, especially in the campaign. I think they really want to try that. Of course, to what degree the engine will allow them to do so is another matter entirely. But they sound fairly, well, bright-eyed about it, to put it one way. But of course it'll vary from situation to situation. But at the end of the day, yes, you'll have access to some allies from time to time. It'll depend on the mission. And lastly, in terms of mission types, what kind will there be? How many mission types are we facing? The only thing that was confirmed by the developers is that there will not be escort missions. You'll be able to attack convoys, presumably, so there might be convoy intercept missions, but escorting convoys is not a thing that is going to be included in the game. I really hope that they that they stick to their guns on this one, because I support them wholeheartedly. Though I have a weird feeling that there might be VIP missions in the campaign, or in some of the story arcs, that you won't so much be forced to escort a unit, as you will be forced to just, fight alongside a unit that can't die. But outside of that, there's nothing more really to be said about missions. On to the next subject. Starting location. So, starting location is exactly what I've mentioned before, or earlier in this podcast. It's that, well, you choose which faction you were born into. You'll be starting off with a different mech. You'll be starting off with a different reputation status with that faction and the factions around it. It'll also affect how much money you have off of the start. Maybe some equipment that you'll have access to in your inventory. These sorts of things. Potentially even the first couple of mercenaries that you'll be able to hire on. Who knows? Not really something that was discussed too heavily, but in retrospect, it's an interesting possibility that you'll be able to run into certain handcrafted mercenaries that you can then hire in different parts of the inner sphere. But beyond that, there isn't much more outside of starting location that there is to cover. I mean, you might face some different difficulty depending on where you start, so it might be easier to start out in Steiner space because they seem to be a faction that loves energy weapons, for example. So you might have an easier time getting your hands on PPCs, for example. Outside of that, just like tiny variations in difficulty and maybe oh well, definitely you'll have to face a great deal of variance in terms of the kind of mechs you will be running into on the field, depending on where you spawn. So, if you spawn out in Steiner space, let's stick with the example, you're more likely to be running into awesomes later on in the campaign. Or, I don't know, what else would be a typical Steiner mech, or a mech that the Steiners would field typically? Because all of this is tied to, well, rarity tables, but I suppose I'll cover that in a moment. For now, suffice it to say that there will be some variance in terms of the kind of mechs you'll be running into, the kind of equipment you'll be running across, and difficulty will vary based on that. So in Merrick space, you're more likely to run into vehicles as enemies than you will be in Steiner space, for example. That sort of nonsense. Another point about the start is that you will only have one mech at your disposal and one mercenary. That is yourself. This poses some problems for cooperative play, especially in the early game. But I will discuss those in the co-op section, because there is other stuff to discuss there as well. Suffice it to say that if you only start out with one mech and one boy, how are you supposed to have anyone spawn in with you? How are you supposed to play co-op campaign with all of your friends from the very get-go? I'll discuss this later, but for now, it is as it is. And yeah, okay, I guess I wasn't going to mention it here. So, the thing I wanted to mention earlier is that due to the way the inner sphere is, and the kind of time constraint you are working under, and the availability of planets you will have to explore, you won't necessarily see everything that the inner sphere has to offer in one playthrough. Excuse me, jeez. Okay. So your starting position will likely dictate the kind of it'll dictate the kind of mechs you're going to be likely to run into, and as a result, the kind of mechs that are going to go into forming your operative lance. Think of it like Pokemon in this respect. Different regions are going to have different rarity scales on mechs. So, let's take an example out of Pokemon Red. In the starting region, just off to the if you go just left of which gym was it? Was it the Viridian City gym? Either way, it's that region just before the it's just before the area where you run into the Elite Four for the first time. And it's a place where you go to farm Nidorans because they have the highest chance of spawning there, and it's either going to be a male or female Nidoran, depending on if you are playing red or blue version, but it's what you will have potential access to. And God knows, the evolution chain of Nidoran is one of the strongest Pokemon in the game, especially towards the end of as you have your Nidoking set up. But yeah, if you go through the game normally and don't even know that that region exists, which like the first time I played through the game, which was actually very recently, believe it or not. Yeah, I only found out halfway through the game that that region even existed. And I started really kicking myself for having not tried to explore a bit more in order to find that place, because goddamn, Nidoking is a really powerful Pokemon. And so yeah, you will run into a similar state of affairs with the inner sphere in terms of your starting location and the places you are going to likely travel to. So yeah, it will dictate your playthrough to some degree. Will you be able to collect everything in one go? Like all of the various mech chassis, of which there's going to be upwards of 250? Maybe? I mean, if you really optimize it well, sure. But is it going to be a sure thing? I don't know. It'll be very unlikely that you'll be able to do that naturally. It's one of those things you'd have to be going out of your way to do, and that would require a lot of research into spawning variables and good RNG on top of that. Another note in terms of the starting conditions is that there will be no unlockable starting conditions. What you see is what you get. You won't be able to play through the campaign one time, and because you've finished some achievement or other, you'll be able to spawn out in Karita space on your next playthrough, not with a Jenner, let's say, but with a Dragon Mech, for example. None of that. Will this be able to be modded in? Probably. Go for it. But yeah, it's not going to be a natural game mechanic that they're going to include. In terms of starting as a pirate or periphery factions, this was sort of confirmed earlier on in other AMAs, one of the first 3 AMA days that were done. But apparently they've gone into more discussions on the subject, whether or not they want to include that. Mostly because of the kind of, well, mission alignments that you'll be able to get out of it. So say you start as a pirate faction, you'll probably, in order to keep it lore friendly, you'd have to have access to some quote unquote more interesting mission types. So, in terms of that, they were probably discussing if they want to include the Pirate and Periphery factions as selectable options. If I had to be cynical, I would say another factor of the discussion was, is this actually good DLC content? Which, if I'm being honest, this would be the prime thing you'd see as DLC. It's like, okay, cool. Base game launches, you have your 5 starting factions. But in terms of DLC, you'll be able to get your hands on the Periphery and Pirate factions coming down in the DLC pipeline. Are they actively working on it and holding back development on it? Who knows? This is pure speculation on my part, and it is just a reflection of my cynicism in this matter. But if I was a game develop or the manager of a game developing house like PGI, I would say, yeah, don't waste your time trying to code in more starting factions. Just focus on the base 5, Liao, Merrick, Kurita, Steiner, and Davian. That's fine for base game. When it comes to DLC, that's when we'll do some coding for Periphery and Pirate factions. And in order to spice things up, we'll also maybe release some more mechs and along with it, just to spice the bundle up a bit. But again, I'm gonna stress this is my cynicism speaking. So make of this what you will. They are in the process of discussion, is the official stance on the matter. And on that cynical note, we can move on to the next topic. Chiefly, the salvage mechanic. Salvage is going to work sort of like Harebrained Schemes Battletech is. You will have your negotiable. You'll be able to negotiate for either C-bills, reputation, or salvage rights, as it is the case in HBSBT. There is going to be a bit more nuance to it, however, in that when you are negotiating for more salvage rights, you're negotiating for these quote-unquote picks, or I guess you can call it a quasi-currency, like a sort of negotiating clout for, or argumentative capacity in terms of the kind of things you'll be able to take off the field. Now, the way they've described this to work is that your reputation will have some sort of base effect on it. So if your reputation is like bad with a faction, they'll, even if you negotiate for a high amount of salvage rights, that high amount of salvage rights is either way going to be lower for the same difficulty mission than if you did that same difficulty mission for them later on when you had a better reputation with them. So you'll get less picks versus more quote-unquote picks, depending on your reputation. But the most important bit about it is that various pieces of equipment will have different salvage right costs. So they will cost more picks than other pieces of equipment. As like a ballpark number, just to illustrate things, medium lasers will cost 1 pick, for example, and a Gauss rifle will cost 10 picks. These are random numbers I feel I should stress again. This will likely also scale with the kind of quirks that a weapon may have. So a standard medium laser will only cost 1 pick, let's say, but a medium laser plus plus will cost 2 picks, for example. And honestly, I think this system does. I think it's better than what Harebrained Schemes has going for themselves. I'm curious to see how it'll turn out. Moving on then, over to the co-op mode. Some more things have been fleshed out in this regard. First and foremost, just to reiterate things. Excuse me, jeez. Too much water. only the host player's campaign will actually progress during the co-op playthrough. So this isn't really something that's a lot of people are getting somewhat disheartened by the fact that if you play co-op with your friend's campaign, you will have no tangible benefit to your own campaign, which I find to be a weird uh, criticism of the co-op system, largely because back in the day, say when I was playing co-op campaign with my friends on like in Halo with my friends on their Xbox, like there was no idea in my mind that okay, I'm not going to be able to take anything back home with me of this. Like, oh no, I can't play Halo on my own Xbox because I didn't have an Xbox anyway. So maybe I'm just out of the loop on this sort of sentiment. But yeah, like when you went over to your friend's house to play co-op Halo campaign, like how many people actually thought, oh, like there's not going to be any benefit to my own single player game because I'm going to be playing co-op with this friend of mine. Like a petty grievance this is. Anyway, so to further clarify things on the co-op mode, only the host will have ultimate control over which missions are taken, what kind of equipment is bought, mechs repaired, sold, so on and so forth, though the other players will be able to view all of it. As a co-op friend, you'll be able to jump in to your friend's campaign instance, you'll be able to see what they see. This is still being explored a bit, whether or not you'll have free cam capability inside the Leopard dropship or not. But overall, you'll have this freedom, or you'll be able to see what your friend is seeing at the very least. And when it comes time to drop and he puts you into your various, mechs as the system is going to work, that's when you'll be able to actually get your hands on the reins. Now, one final note before I get into the point that really sort of grinds my gears, and who knows, maybe my criticism of this is also somewhat ill-founded. But just final bit of clarification, co-op play will be direct peer-to-peer. There is not going to be any sort of random matchmaker. It's your friends hosting the game, you're playing the game on your friend's client instance. So yeah. But now, the real big thing. Since you start all out and you're lonesome, with only one mech and one mercenary pilot, which is to say yourself, where the hell are your co-op buddies supposed to go at the beginning of the campaign? The devs did mention that getting your hands on the first 4 mechs during the campaign is going to be a lot easier, but like I they said that it wouldn't take too many hours to do so. But essentially you are running into a soft grind wall if you want to play the game with your buddies like from the get-go. You won't be able to share that campaign experience of the first few missions with them because those are the ones where you'd be grinding out in order to get your hands on the first few mechs and few mercenary pilots that you're going to need, which your friends will then take the place of. Depending on how fast this is, it is to get up to this full lance strength. This may not be an issue at all, and I might just be blowing things out of the water. If this is just supposed to be some early tutorial section that is going to be only taking you like an hour, maybe two at most, like yeah, okay, fine. I can live with that. You'll still have instant action available to you, but I don't know. It strikes me as a poor way to do things. There seem to be coding limitations at play. Um, the devs have spoken quite vociferously about like how they're not trying to overreach with the co-op system, that ultimately they want to focus on developing the single player experience, and the co-op is just going to be extra flavor on top of that. But I think if they do go forward with this, that you will only have the one mech to start off with, depending on how long it takes. Again, it might turn some people off of co-op. This is the fear I have. Whether or not that fear is well founded is entirely debatable. Um, People have mentioned to me that Tom Clancy's Division had a similar system in place where you first had to go through a bunch of tutorial before you were able to play with your friends in co-op. Or would it be called co-op then, or would it just be like the normal multiplayer experience that you were actually getting in for with the Division? Yeah, who knows? Either way. Maybe I'm blowing this too far out of proportion, but I don't know. I find it to be weird. Um, Essentially, your mileage may vary. And I somewhat have to agree with the dev's perspective on this, because ultimately, playing co-op with your friends in this matter should be a player-driven experience. You shouldn't have to feel as though they're trying to ram this mechanic down your throat, on the one hand, but on the other, there is a certain problem of incentive. Ultimately, at the end of the day, people will still take advantage of the co-op mechanic, so it probably won't be as big a problem as I'm making it out to be. But the fear is there. Especially when after having seen people complain about the reward aspect of playing co-op, that it will have no effect on their own single-player campaigns. Like, I don't know. In regards to that premise, or in that argument, and then putting this side by side with it, maybe I'm taking in the wrong premises, but the fear is there, but I'll move on. Moving on then to a discussion of the Inner Sphere map and how it will progress throughout the campaign. First off, there will be no access to clan space or the deep periphery. So if you were expecting Tortuga Alliance, sorry, it's not a thing. The Hanseatic League, also not a thing. Possible DLC content? Maybe. I don't know. It sounds again like a pretty good candidate for a DLC. But for now, no access to clan space or deep periphery. As mentioned before, the map state will change over time in order to reflect the events that have happened at specific times in the lore, such as the discovery of the Helm memory core, which planets changed hands during the ongoing Fourth Succession War conflict. Like, all of these things will be taken into account in some fashion. What items you'll have access to in the market, those things will change as well, like all of this. Furthermore, in terms of mission difficulty or mission reward or intensity, the spiciest missions will be available on the borders of faction space, where the conflicts are actually happening. So, the deeper you go into a faction's territory, the less there will be that is interesting to do. On the front lines, you'll be running into more difficult missions with bigger rewards. In the interior, you're likely going to be doing pirate controlling actions and weird mop-up things in regards to potential assassinations of various figureheads, that sort of stuff. Not necessarily high-intensity conflict, but it might pay well. in order to inform you of various things happening in the galaxy, like events, the changing of hands of various planets. You'll have this sort of like galactic news network style um, system that will clue you into various interesting or points of interest, conflict zones in the inner sphere, market discounts in specific locations. It depends. But you will have some sort of system that will direct you towards these events. And final put, no, my face is starting to grow tired with all the talking. Advancing the timeline will work much the same way as it does in Harebrained Schemes BattleTech. So you'll likely have a pause mechanic where you're going to be able to do things. How it's going to be implemented, I don't know yet. The devs haven't said anything about it, nor was it particularly asked. But yeah, you unpause the game in order to do your repairs. Time advances during that time, or the game clock will advance during that time. There, now it's not a redundant statement. And traveling between systems will also advance the timeline, because, it takes time to go from place to place. Anyway, moving on then, swiftly, because we're actually nearly done. We just have the final point about BattleMechs and the couple of remaining miscellaneous points to cover. So in terms of BattleMechs, what are we expecting in terms of campaign progression? The likelihood of running into a specific mech chassis is tied to its canonical appearance in the timeline, as well as whatever else other shenaniganry happened in lore during that period. So, an example that was brought up was the Cataphract. It has a specific date when it was first manufactured, when it was first fielded. There's also a date when its primary manufacturing facility switched hands between, I think it was House Liao and House Merrick. And as a result, the availability of cataphracts plummeted sharply for one of these two factions, and the other one suddenly had access to it. And so, yeah, these logistical chains are going to be modeled in the rarity tables for certain mechs. So if you want to do the whole Pokemech experience, you'll have to keep track of the events that are going on. Like, if a bunch of Thunderbolt factories get shut down, you're going to have a lot more trouble running into fresh Thunderbolts on the field, most likely. Depending on which faction space you are in, they may not field a mech chassis at all. So, like, the urban mech may be specific only to Liao space for a very long time. But with an event change, suddenly bordering factions may start getting their hands on it. Who knows? I'm not too familiar with the lore of this period. Suffice it to say that these events will have a massive effect on how the game plays out. Whether or not the player will be aware of it is another matter entirely, but for now it sounds like a pretty decent system to put in place, and I'm curious to see how it'll turn out. Where will you be able to get your hands on BattleMechs? Marketplace, salvage, contract rewards. Easy said, easy done. And lastly, Hero Mechs. Hero Mechs have been confirmed to be a thing. You can get your hands on them, but it is going to be more difficult. So it's not going to be like Rogue Tech, like the Rogue Tech mod for HBS BattleTech, where if you run into a hero mech, you can just destroy it and salvage it for parts, do it a couple times, and you suddenly have a hero mech. No. Hero mechs are likely going to be Easter egg unique units that you'll have to go out of your way to find for various reasons. Maybe they'll only have limited production. Who knows? I'm not too familiar with the lore concerning hero mechs, but this is going to be something to consider. As a mechanic, it would be interesting if they did have them as these sort of trophy mechs that you can only get in a specific place, sort of like legendary Pokemon. God, I keep coming back to the Pokemon analogies. So yeah, how it'll be implemented, we're not yet sure. The devs didn't really say anything about it. I have a feeling they want us to sort of find out on our own. Suffice it to say that they will be a thing, you can get your hands on them, but they'll be rare as hell. And now, on to the final section, and this one is going to be quick. The miscellaneous section. So first and foremost, some clarifications on the dropship. It has been again reiterated that you're not going to be able to tweak the dropship in the same way as you were able to in Harebrained Schemes BattleTech. They did have some discussions about fleshing the system out, but they haven't really said anything concrete about putting anything new in, like the ability to upgrade mech bays, increase repair times. None of this has been stated. Furthermore, there is no word at the moment on what traveling between the systems will be like. There seems to be some talk of a cutscene-like mode, like you get in Harebrained Schemes BattleTech, what I call the dropship glam cam. They said they were working on it as we speak, really. They just mentioned that they had like a meeting on it literally that day, just before the AMA, as to what they're going to be doing with traveling between stars and how that's supposed to function. Mini events. While we're on the subject of the dropship, mini events have been discussed. No mechanic exists as yet. And what do I mean by mini events? So stuff like what you get with HBS BattleTech, interactions essentially between your crew members. So random little flavor tidbits of fights in the corridors that increase or raise your troops' morale, that put your mercenaries in high or low spirits depending on who you sided with in a confrontation, blah 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 blah. Those things, not really going to be a thing. Don't expect them. Maybe they'll be put in later on down the road, but for now, nothing on that subject. Solaris is a big nope. There's just too much scope in order to put in like a gladiatorial combat system for the base game. Will it be a DLC? One can speculate. It does seem like a prime DLC candidate, but for now, no. Speaking of DLC candidates, that third to be announced expansion for HBS BattleTech, I have a weird feeling it is going to turn out to be Solaris. Because we had flashpoints, the urban update has been announced, and then there's this unannounced piece of DLC that is going to come down the pipe. Excuse me. And I have a weird suspicion it might be Solaris. If it turns out to be clans, I'm going to roll over laughing. Either way, getting back on topic, pilot injuries are going to be a thing. So we don't know how it's going to work. The devs said they are not comfortable sharing details about it yet, as they are still tweaking it. But yeah, pilot injuries are going to be a thing. Have fun. And final note, repair times. It will require time and C-bills to perform repairs, and you will not need specific parts in order to repair mechs. So that's all it will be. Basically the typical thing you have right now in HBS BattleTech. And on that note, that covers all of yesterday's AMA sessions, both the morning and afternoon. So yeah, without further ado, I'm going to start wrapping up this podcast episode, because I don't really have much more to say about it. final bit of news, channel-wise, I guess I can share. I did mention in the State of the Series address, the most recent one, that I was going to be working on, or that I would release within a week, a review of MechWarrior Online, and that has turned into a larger project than I expected it to. Um, I've been seriously going over a script rewrite. I've been considering narrowing the scope of the review I plan on doing, because right now it stands to be a fairly lengthy adventure itself. So, I don't know if I want to make it shorter, more pithy, or if I do want to go for the whole exhaustive analysis. Because honestly, exhaustive analysis is the sort of thing I really like to do, as you can sort of tell. How long is this recording so far? Oh yeah, we just breached the 1 hour 5 minutes mark. And we're about to breach the 1 hour 5 or 6 minutes right about now. So yeah. Fortunately, this podcast managed to be shorter than the other ones I've done with Kibs. In terms of other content I'm going to be doing, there is that MechWarrior Online review I just mentioned. I'm also working on another review for another game, as well as that weird master project for the real-time strategy breakdown, or not breakdown, but exhaustive analysis of the evolution of real-time strategy. All of these things are being worked on more or less in tandem to one another. Honestly, as to the MechWarrior Online review, it'll be released soonish. Like, give it another week or two. And I ought to have something put together that I'll then upload. And lastly, in terms of live streaming Rogue Tech and working on the weird story content I had in mind, or quasi-story series for Rogue Tech. This is also in the works. I'm pre-recording that one quite heavily in order to help construct the narrative a bit better and to flesh out the characters that I have in mind. Oh god, I'm essentially working on a video game fan fiction. Existential crisis is setting in. Anyway, before my head melts and my jaw falls off due to overuse and overspeaking, I'm going to cut things off here. If you were expecting more content from me of the other stuff, I ask for your patience, and, well, sorry that it's taken me so long, but I do want to put out the best thing I possibly can. And I don't want to be misinforming people, especially in regards to the MechWarrior Online review, because that's been another thing that was on my mind in regards to it. Like, is this a fair review? Am I being as generous in my interpretation as possible? Am I being as objective as possible? Or, like, to what degree am I being too biased? Those sorts of considerations. I've been thinking about it a great deal, and for now, I'm going to continue mulling it over. Give it another week or two, and it'll probably come out within that time, because I'll either grow fed up with myself, or I'll simply yeah, I'll grow fed up with myself in all likelihood and just release what I have currently. Anyway, without further ado, I have been Smastian. I will see you on the battlefield or in the recording booth again. And that is all for today. Have a good day, everyone.